The Wheel of Time, Season 2, Episode 5. Do not worry, this is not my new setup after moving. This is just the setup you've been seeing, completely broken down and packed up. You'll be seeing the new setup probably week after next, but for now, let's go ahead and just get on into a really exciting piece of channel news that if you don't care about, skip to the actual review right here. But I'm really happy to say the 30 plus copyright claims against my Fringe video were all finally dropped. They were originally disputed, then I had to appeal them. I sent off all of the appeals at once, even though if I lost just 3, it would have meant potentially my channel could have been deleted. And we came out on top, which means at noon Eastern Standard Time Thursday, when YouTube tells me the most of you are on this platform, I will be finally releasing my deep dive feature length. It's over 3 hours into Fringe. This is my baby, my magnum opus video. I've hired a professional editor for it, and I'm as emotionally tied into this as I am as some of my books, so if you wouldn't mind just giving it a watch, it would mean the world to me. And if it's not your thing, maybe just put the volume at 1, put it on somewhere in another room and walk away. I don't know, I'm just saying. I don't know if YouTube would be mad at it. It's a joke, YouTube, don't hurt me. I'll end this by saying thank you for putting up with my freaking out about all these copyright claims on Twitter, and get ready for what is just undoubtedly the greatest video I have ever made, dropping noon Eastern Standard Time, Thursday, the 21st. I'm so excited. But without any further ado, let's talk about episode 5 of season 2, For What? I was packing up my house and I checked Twitter and was actually reminded that Wheel of Time was coming out because people were just flooding my timeline talking about how this was their favorite episode so far this season, which got me pretty excited. The season as a whole has been kind of doing that trend upward, so I was hoping to see that continue for me personally. And while I don't think this is my new favorite episode, it's probably tied for that place with episode 3 for me. I like the pacing and specific structure of this episode more, but I think I like the dialogue more from episode 3. We'll get into that more later on. This is, without question, the most action-packed episode for the Wheel of Time show so far, for better and worse. And just for the early spoiler-free section of this video where we don't actually go over the events of the episode and give full nuanced thoughts, it also is the one that just had like no plot lines that felt like they were just a waste of time or wheel spinning. There was definitely a continued momentum from beginning to end, and with it being well over an hour in length, I certainly didn't feel that at all. So spoiler free, I'm giving this one a pretty solid 7 out of 10. It's not like between a 7 to an 8 or between a 7 to a 6. For me, this one is just like kind of exactly into that like 6.9 to 7.1 range. It is worth note before we get into more of these storylines that there is a severe absence of both Matt and Lan from this episode, and I think that is equally to the detriment and benefit. What is going on with Matt is really interesting, and I want to see more of Donald Flynn's interpretation. And what is going on with Lan, let's move on from that. But getting into my spoiler-filled thoughts for this episode, 3, 2, 1 now, we're going to continue on with the same structure we did for the previous reviews, which is talking about all the different various plot lines from my least favorite to my favorite. And unfortunately in this episode, my least favorite, mostly because of just the structure of it, is going to still be Perrin's. I do want to note, even the weakest plotline from this episode, I'm okay with. I didn't hate anything I was seeing happening on the screen. It's just that it's kind of undeniable that quite a bit of the screen time for Perrin in this episode is literally walking in a circle. But once he ends up back in the village where he kind of started, the events that happen within that town are enticing. And seeing this correction of course to end back up on the rails to be a lot closer to the books is actually feeling rather cohesive here, despite some changes kind of making me still internally go, but that's the last I'll mention to that because we spent way too much time talking about that in the last review. After being led around in that big old loop by Elias, Perrin meets the White Cloaks within a village, and we are introduced to Dane Bornhald. And I really enjoyed this next layer being added to the White Cloaks because, of course, with the Questioners, even in the books, they are just almost mustache twirling level bad guys. not opposed to that, but it's to the benefit of the organization in terms of their presence in the world to have people who feel more reasonable within their ranks, and Dane Bornhold is fitting into that slot. And seeing Marcus Rutherford have this conflict where he's next to Dane Bornhold, ends up eavesdropping before deciding to free Aviendha, who's being kept in a cage, extremely reminiscent of how another character I wish we had honestly seen here was introduced in the book. It all, again, just feels like it's getting closer into being a turning of the wheel that dimensionally is more in proximity to the original Wheel of Time storytelling, which, let's be honest, any Wheel of Time fan who knows about all the parallel different dimensions that are reflections of the main timeline, you're thinking of this show as one of those reflections. Still, though, Abdul Salis absolutely just soaks up the camera whenever he's on screen. His Valda just, mwah. Even in season 1, I was a big fan of his Valda, so seeing him return now is just all the gravy. I appreciate that. Give me Valda's gravy? Nope, I'm not. Nope, One of the interesting angles to this, though, unlike in the book where it's a different Aiel, we encounter Aviendha being kept in a cage in this town. And they actually upped the stakes from the conflict they're referencing in the book and had more White Cloaks come out to stop Perrin from breaking Aviendha out of this cage. At first, I had some issue with Perrin's motivation for even being here to be burying Uno, but the more I thought about it, the more I actually kind of thought, like, no, that's in line with Perrin's character. He wouldn't let his friend just rot in a cage. I think the reason I originally might have had some problems with it was I did wish we got a little more characterization and connection with this interpretation of Uno before he was killed off. So it felt like, for me, the viewer, why is he doing this? But once I was like, oh no, for the character, this makes sense. Perrin frees Aviendha from her prison, and then we get another Aiel action sequence. And I'm really surprised to say that the Aiel might be comparatively stronger to Wetlanders in this storytelling than they are in the books. In the books, Aiel kick ass. They are worth several fighters on their own. But Aviendha here just mops the floor with, like, I think almost a dozen White Cloaks. I didn't actually stop to count with Perrin's assistance, but god damn, they're almost making these Aiel fight like Captain Goddamn America. Visually, I enjoy it. While this wasn't as impressive as the last Aiel fight scene we got in the way it was shot, it was still really impressive. It just makes me wonder, how the hell were the Aiel wars not just a wash? Perrin and Aviendha successfully make their escape. Perrin begs for Dane Bornhold's life, really, again, leaning into the setup between the relationship of these two nicely. And then we see Perrin and Aviendha off on their own, and she says she has toe to Perrin and begins to follow him around. All of which leans into, yes, we're getting more of the lore, more of the world building for Wheel of Time in this episode. The personality of Aviendha is quite different from what we get in the books, though that's fine. Like, we're all just kind of on a different timeline here, so we're gonna have a new interpretation. And the banter she had with Perrin was enjoyable enough. It's just kind of, I never really pictured Perrin and Aviendha talking too much in the series. I don't think they do talk much to my memory at all. And so seeing Aviendha being introduced through Perrin certainly feels strange, though Aviendha doesn't always have too much to do later on in the series. And so if they're gonna be rolling in a couple of those characters' main plot lines to instead be given to Aviendha, I certainly could see that working. For this plotline as a whole, though, I was fine enough with everything I was getting. I thought the pacing and structure was the weakest so far, and before I really come to like solid conclusions and how I feel in it, I need to see more of where it's going. But for what's actually in this episode, next up I want to talk about the Seanchan plotline, all of which has really cool stuff orbiting around it. It's just that the actress for High Lady Suroth isn't necessarily doing it for me. The performance is a little bit weaker, and a lot of great actors can bring a villainous presence that's over the top of the screen and deliver it well. This just felt like a really good local theater level performance for that kind of over the top villain, which wasn't meeting the bar. Though, for a lot of the aesthetics here on the screen, I am really enjoying the costuming for the Seanchan. The culture is not being played down, and it really does feel like a foreign invading force coming into these wetlands, which is reflected nicely with the Aiel, who are being treated as if they are these savages, but in reality are shown to have like, oh, okay, actually a lot of respect towards Perrin, and they're the ones who are being mistreated, whereas the Seanchan are being painted as coming across like so noble, so above it all. And there's dark friends in their rank, and they're really awful to people. Not as awful as the White Cloaks, but that's a low bar. Totally forgot to mention the Horn of Valir here, which I'm not really feeling in this show so far. It doesn't really weave into the story as well as I think it did in the source material, but I'm most curious about how people who haven't read the books are thinking about the Horn of Villiers and its importance, because the Great Hunt stresses it incessantly, and this season is kind of treating it as like a background prop that's like, look at this thing, without really getting into the context. So I don't know, that one I'm not feeling as much. And I don't even know if you want to count this as a different plot line because it ties in so directly. But next up, I want to talk about Elayne, Nynaeve, and Egwene, who were betrayed by, yes, revealed to be a Black Aja member, and are handed on off to the Seanchan. And this chase sequence could have been so much better. It felt really disappointing, not only in how brief it was and not tension causing within me, but on top of that, just how it was actually shot. Granted, I did really like the Dumani and how they were chasing them down and the pain in their eyes, and even the idea of like a gag can work for sure, though I hope that doesn't limit Madeline Madden's performance later on. Just the actual direction and execution was severely lacking, and despite how much I liked various things going on in this episode, I will say the direction as a whole, I really started to struggle with at times. Overall, the show is improving on its visuals, but improving does not mean great yet. And then we get Elayne and Nynaeve walking into the city, where of course all of our characters are kind of migrating toward, and they're taken out by a warder in a way that feels almost cartoonish, and with them already having been knocked out for a good first chunk of their storyline here, it just felt like, okay, at what point is severe head trauma gonna come into this? The more I think about it, the more I really have a problem with this just tossing into a wall knockout sequence for Nynaeve and Elayne for a couple of reasons. One, I think Nynaeve throughout the season should have been talking to more Yellow Sisters and maybe like found a note or something that like, hey, this is a sign for a safe haven for people who know the Yellow Aja over here, which is something that is in the books quite heavily, and I don't know if they'll put here, or something along those lines that could have been earned, rather than just a warder randomly spotting them and them being displayed to be incompetent once again. It even could have built into the conflict between Nynaeve and Elayne, where Nynaeve proves she can lead right now. And then the final reason is just Elayne and Nynaeve, yes, they were unconscious probably because of like weaves and stuff from Liandrin, not just head trauma, but they were just thrown into a wall. There's a lot of unconsciousness, and it can't help feel like it's sapping agency to a point. That aside though, Nynaeve's interaction with Liandrin, those two actresses can just bring it. And again, this show is giving depth to dark friends, which I really appreciate. It's one of the strongest elements to Wheel of Time. And if you're going to have these kind of Lanfear, Shamael level like presences on the screen that feel so knowingly evil, I think it's important, especially for the lower tier people who do end up joining the Shadow, to give a reason why. Why would you end up over here? Well, it makes complete sense for Liandrin now. That plus Elayne trying to take charge, Nynaeve being like, there's conflict between the two. And as I said in my last review, we know that's gonna lead to blind spots for them because they're not focusing on working as a team, and they're still a bit immature in how they're handling this overall situation, which perfectly aligns with the characterization in the books. Then we cut back to Egwene being collared, and there's not only the implication there for us, the readers, of just how awful we know what is to come is for her, but the visual representation of a collar that goes a bit more beyond feels greater in restriction. I think because in the books you're able to deliver so much depth to the like details of what's going on with Damani, having some more overt representations visually on the screen can fill in some of the gaps that could be lost between mediums. Though I will say the effect of like the CG thing that looked more like Iron Man's nanotech armor coming together, that felt wrong. No, I don't like that. The collars are supposed to be like physical made collars that are falling into, I guess I won't spoil it for people who haven't read the books, a type of magical item that is very physical. But instead we're getting something here represented in the show, at least in the language it's established so far, something that feels far more Age of Legends-y instead of just built now and utilized now for a purpose. But speaking of Age of Legends, transition, let's go ahead and talk about my favorite slash second favorite plot lines that are so intertwined we're just going to talk about them together, and that would be Rand and Moraine, Lanfear and Shamael. This is still maybe the best Wheel of Time joke I've ever put in a video that has been cut out and put in GIFs and stuff across the internet, and we're dealing with the ramifications of Moraine blocking Lanfear, which if there's anyone in the world you probably shouldn't cock block, it would be Lanfear. Avoiding spoilers for later on in the series, we see Lanfear has access to a certain special power, which is beyond what typical Aes Sedai or even Black Sisters can use. She uses that to revive herself, and yes, I am much more okay with the revival of Forsaken being handled this way in the show. It of course begs the question of like, well, why didn't Moraine just sit there and cut her head off? The response would be, well, she could probably heal from that too, but who knows? Just don't be that guy, because this is a show and we need to condense. I'm not saying it's better, I'm just saying it's more appropriate for the medium. And then we get a pretty great pursuit where Lanfear is after them. Moraine and Rand end up at a stable, hijack 3 horses, killing a 4th so Lanfear can't take it. And that level of dedication from Moraine, I really appreciate. She is someone who in the books tells Rand to his face, if I feel like you're going to the shadow, I'll kill you. And just like, yeah, give her those moments where Moraine is like, I'm not Gandalf. Gandalf kind of put mittens on when he handled the hobbits. Rand, I'll tear your goddamn head off. They ride off down the countryside, and then someone coming to put their horse in this stable with the worst luck maybe of anyone we've seen in this show so far, gets his head detonated by Lanfear so that she can take his horse and go off after them. And this is a more blunt Lanfear than we get in the book. I mean, she wakes up and says the word bitch, which, I don't know, as a Wheel of Time fan, that felt weird. I don't know, I'm being a book purist snob at that point. I'll leave it alone. Detail to me I really appreciate is characters who have been using the one power up until this point have been doing it with a lot of intention and almost reverence a lot of the time. Like when Moraine is in Winter's Night and she embraces the Source and takes on the Trollocs, it's this huge deal moment. Even the training session in Tar Valon where they're trying to purify water, there's this deliberateness. Lanfear, on the other hand, when she's using the power, it's like this quick, lethal decisiveness that provides an edge to her character that I believe if you weren't aware of how big a threat these Forsaken were up to this point, seeing her able to do this stuff not only morally but just physically with this efficiency, I bet it's getting a lot of people who are not familiar with the books there to understanding like, oh yeah, when Moraine said these people have power you can't comprehend, she meant it. Lanfear chases them off down the road. Moraine and Rand dip off for this little subversive trick where you know Moraine is setting this woman up to possibly die at the hands of Lanfear, and yeah, when you got the nuclear bomb that the Shadow's trying to get their hands on, you need to get the nuclear bomb that is the dragon away from them. Sacrificing a peasant's not that much of a cost. But in her generosity, Lanfear just seals the woman's mouth shut after learning of the subterfuge, and watch the Fringe video for me to talk about more hole closing stuff later on. Moraine and Rand end up around Moraine's family more. They flee to Carrion. We get more time with Moraine's nephew. He's a cool guy, but the big takeaway in this moment is that they need to stay awake because Lanfear is the queen of dream murder and torture, so you don't want to go to sleep when she's going to be waiting for you there. Moraine has some character building stuff with her family and seems to come up with a plan on how to fight Moraine, or at least convince her not to just murder them all in their sleep with Rand once he goes to sleep. But we have to rewind a little bit first to talk about Lanfear and Shamael, where in one of my favorite visual, like, Sykes I've maybe seen just in a show this year, we see a Shamael in bed roll over and grab Rand's face, and I assumed in this moment Shamael's in Rand's dream, and the way Rand's gonna get away from Lanfear is he's gonna offer him some form of protection in exchange for something from Rand, and Rand would essentially be forced to take it. But in a really big subversion, Shamael like caresses his face, and I was like, what? And then it's revealed to be a Shamael's dream, and it's Lanfear, and they're still waiting for Rand to go to sleep, and they're just using a dream image of Rand as like a physical prop for their conversation. And that, goddamn, I was I was subverted. And Farah Farah and Natasha O'Keefe are now my favorite actors in this whole series for just how they're able to play off each other here, embody that over-the-top, delicious, chocolatey villainy, and still somehow be playful and human. Like there's that, you're gonna betray me. Of course I am. Which like shouldn't be relatable, but the way they deliver it, you're like, yeah, these feel like old friends who are just giving each other shit. But they mean it. They reference how everything feels so savage to them in this time, 3,000 years after the breaking. We get so much more lore and interesting things around the dream world and beyond that. And as a book fan, it just felt so good to get like this reassuring pat on the back that's like, don't worry, we're getting there. We're gonna recover. Maybe most importantly of all to me though, is we finally layer in that bit of characterization for Shamael, where he talks about how he's the one Forsaken who actually believes in the shadow. Like, he fights for the shadow because he thinks it's in the right. Whereas the other Forsaken are motivated by greed, lust, envy, what have you. And that somehow makes Ishamael successfully elevate to feel like the most dangerous of the Forsaken, because you're not dealing with someone who maybe could be bought or paid, twisted back into the light. No, this is someone who is fervently for the actual shadow. I do think we get lines officially confirming we're not going to have the bit of Ishamael's backstory where he's actually been free at various times in the last 3,000 years folded into the story, but I can understand why that would be cut. And I think they're clearly trying to add that part of Ishamael's political manipulative past more into his story by what he's doing right here and now with the Seanchan. Just wanted to point that out, that they're still bringing it in. I do hope, though, we get more of the different types of evil in Padan Fain, because it feels like that's being entirely swept under the rug, aside from the crucified Myrddraal. But then we see Fain so aligned with Ishamael that I'm left a bit confused, and I hope that's not lost. I almost forgot to talk about this. Big important deal. We also get a bunch of Forsaken name dropped, specifically Moghedien, Grandal, and the boys. No mention of Missana or Semirog. That could partially be in character for Lanfear, who has a hatred of one of her other Forsaken. Or it could be signifying that we are getting those specific two merged into other Forsaken just for time's sake. And then potentially Lanfear's outfit at the end could be a reference to Semirog. I'm not entirely sure. Even well before the show came out, I made a whole video saying the number of Forsaken should be condensed. I stand by that, and those are two of the most cuttable Forsaken to then fold into characters like Lanfear. Oh god, I forgot entirely to talk about the Varen thing. Quick segment for the Detective Varen agency plotline. Varen, I can't talk about this too much without getting into major down the road book spoilers, so I'm just gonna say some of the acting was a bit rough here for me. It felt kind of CW-y with a couple of the other Aes Sedai, just in terms of not having any real gravitas to the performance, and at least in my interpretation, Aes Sedai have always just had gravitas from Idiaja. That just comes as a part of being Aes Sedai. Then again, though, this show has made it clear they're not really trying to lean into the whole Aes Sedai serenity part to it, so at least it's consistent. I'll just say for this plot stuff, there's going to be a book spoiler section at the end of this video. We'll talk about it there. Let's get back to the Forsaken. There's a specific line from Lanfear here with so much content for her other Forsaken aside from Ishamael, which I think is genuine. One of the few genuine lines between these two, where Lanfear does, while she may not love him, respect Ishamael, while she just has a lot of content for pretty much everyone else over here, where she says, Moghedien is insane, Grandal is a vain idiot, and the boys couldn't execute a plan even if they were under compulsion. I've seen so many people online saying this is Lanfear claiming the other three male Forsaken are idiots. I disagree. She specifically already labeled one an idiot. I think she's saying they are incompetent. I think this actually means we're going to see the flaws from the books in these Forsaken, where Ravine is an egomaniac, and other things along those lines. If one is already labeled an idiot, you then don't have another three labeled idiot here. That's my conspiracy theory, full of thought and insight and nuance. Just even beyond the dialogue, the lore, what we get in this scene, the non-verbal cues between the two, the raw acting of the Forsaken gives me so much hope that this show will do a somewhat decent to good job of realizing Wheel of Time's villains, which is filling me with joy. They're over the top, but they're full of character. But the episode then ends, yes, with Rand going into the dream with Moraine and his plan and encountering Lanfear immediately, tied to a wheel in what looks like the Aiel Waste, with Lanfear wearing the most Semirog outfit that's ever Semirogged. It's still kind of a strange visual, but I'm happy to say with the context, I don't hate this as much as I did when I first saw this visual of Rand on the wheel when I first saw it in the trailer. So, in Tel Run Riyadh, yeah, weird stuff can work. Cool. The visual language of this show still drives me nuts. There's something about it that just feels too bright. Like when Moraine and Rand are running from Lanfear at the very beginning, something about it just felt like two people in cosplay in the woods for a moment. But the more I watch of the show, the more my brain adjusts to it, and the more course is corrected back towards the books, it seems. I'm really finding some stuff to enjoy, vaguely referencing what I'm gonna be talking about in the book spoiler section, but keeping it spoiler free for you all. It's these seeds in the show. They're doing a pretty significantly good job of setting up some of the really fun stuff in the story later on. That is why I'm able to say, like, okay, the visual language of season 2 still needs some polish. There's some performances I don't love, and the course needs correcting. But the quality of the re-foundation laying that's happening here and the better oh shit moments of what we're seeing currently in the show give me a lot of hope. And I agree with the general consensus that this season, while not great, is verging into the solidly good territory. I stand by my 7 out of 10 for this episode, and the season as a whole for me is like sitting between a 6 to a 7, which I'm happy about. But now, let's talk about some major book spoilers, full series spoilers, 3, 2, 1 for just a couple minutes here. The Perrin plotline. If you are a book fan, you know Perrin's a member of the Black Aja, but not every Black Aja sister knows the other's identities so that they can, keep doing their nefarious things even if one of them is caught. So where this is going to go with her investigating Liandrin, I am really interested by, especially because the actress for Perrin is really pitch perfect, has that warmness full of depth to them, someone who you want to talk about a book for hours and hours and hours with, but also maintains that underlying current of always seeking more knowledge. Hence Perrin's motivation actually to join the Shadow. She's a big enough nerd to go evil just to understand evil. Perrin at her core is a super nerd. And so what the viewers are being presented with who haven't read the book is an Aes Sedai going about an investigation to find out where Elayne, Egwene, and Nynaeve are, where we from the books know we're watching a black sister investigate another black sister, probably to present like, yeah, I'm actually a good guy and I want these kids to be okay, but also gaining leverage within the Black Aja. God damn, that's good! Don't cut Perrin being a Black Aja member. That's one of the best moments from the books that reveal that simple lie, and the fact that we're also seeing the Aes Sedai can't lie re-emphasized again and again makes me think it won't be cut, because I don't know, for me personally that was really where that oath built towards, especially with also the purification of the White Tower, that whatever, you know what I'm talking about. I will say though, now that we're in book spoiler filled section, I've just had to let go of the idea of ever seeing Mat take on Galad and Gawain in the White Tower, recreating my maybe favorite Mat scene, and fuck! Maybe we'll get a version of it down the road. That's the branch I'm hanging on to there. But let me know your thoughts of this episode of The Wheel of Time in the comments down below. Say goodbye to my office, get ready for the Fringe feature-length film video, but I wanted Fringe feature-length film, whatever. And like and subscribe if you have not already. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.